First, protecting America, protecting the children. That's the focus of tonight's angle. The president has described what we're seeing on the border as a crisis, and it is. Today, he explained the legislative trick bag that he's in due to a tangle of, at times, conflicting immigration laws that are on the books.
We can either release all illegal immigrant families and minors who show.
Well, let's remember there were family detention centers, but a 2016 court ruling effectively shut them down. A decision cheered by international migration activists who consider all detainment to be a human rights violation. And due to the Flores settlement, that's a court settlement, a minor cannot be held in custody for more than 20 days. So the administration is left with few choices. It's either enforce the law and arrest the border crossers, separating those families, or just let everybody with a child into the country, no questions asked. Now, that also would include human traffickers, drug cartels, and others who are exploiting the children that they're traveling with. So do you see how irresponsible and even cruel it would be for the administration to just wave all family units in without even vetting who these people are? Well, predictably, liberals have attempted to focus our attention on images of children, heartbreaking for sure, separated from their parents at the border. But I have a question. Where were they just a few years ago when Barack Obama faced a similar surge at the border? I don't recall the same type of wall-to-wall media outrage then, or the nasty charges that Obama had opened concentration camps for illegal kids. As someone who has spent a lot of time, myself, in Central America, I know how desperately hard it is for the children there, and the terrible abuses that they endure both at home and in some cases when they come to the United States, that long trek, that entire way. And we're all really concerned about the well-being of children, and keeping children with their parents, of course, is always the ideal. But the truth of the matter is, the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen said it right yesterday. Of the 12,000 kids in U.S. custody, it's 2,000, not 12,000, but 2,000 of them have been separated from their parents. The rest basically were abandoned. They had no families. Lost in this easy scapegoating of Donald Trump, of course, is a Bush-era law that got us into this crisis that we're seeing now at the border. So while it's well-intentioned, this flawed piece of legislation was designed to curb human trafficking. It had a slew of unintended consequences. It was called the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2008. That law does not allow the government to immediately deport minors from any country other than Canada and Mexico, so no non-contiguous countries. And according to the New York Times, the legislation requires that they have an immigration hearing, an advocate, and counsel. It also mandates that they are turned over to Health and Human Services and placed in, quote, the least restrictive setting that is in the best interest of the child, and to explore reuniting those children with family members. Well, that's exactly what the Trump administration is doing. These kids are placed in one of about 100 refugee resettlement centers that are the, quote, least restrictive setting for the child. Far from the cage kids canard that has been sold to us on television 24/7, this is footage that HHS has provided to a number of media outlets of a facility here in El Cajon called Casa San Diego. As you can see, they're perfectly clean classrooms, it's a medical clinic, walls that are adorned with superheroes and religious cards, and the kids, thankfully, are given hot meals every day. And there's an outside area for the 65 children who are housed there to play and recreate. It's not ideal, but it's not a concentration camp, and don't say that. According to the staff at Casa San Diego, only 10% of the kids there were actually separated from their parents. 90% of those residents were trafficked, sent across the border alone. This house is similar to Casa Padre in Texas. It's the largest government contracted immigrant youth center in the nation, one of the dozens funded by you, the U.S. taxpayers. Once a former Walmart, NPR witnessed boys at Casa Padre, quote, shooting baskets, kicking soccer balls, playing video games, watching a movie, sitting in classrooms where they were taught about U.S. government, and they were even learning Tai Chi, and they got a meal of chicken and vegetables. That's NPR's description. Now, do those centers look like Dachau to you, Auschwitz? As we reported last night, it costs the U.S. taxpayer about $35,000 a year to keep each of these children housed and cared for in these facilities. But do not confuse the temporary central processing center in McAllen, Texas, complete with fencing and Mylar blankets, with the HHS-run refugee centers for young people. They are not the same thing. But the media are maliciously trying to confuse the two and make people believe that children are being shuttled into cages to languish for months and months. The online virtue signalers, of course, want to keep the emotional heat on this story high, turn it up high, and smudge the hard facts surrounding it. But the funny thing is that most of those claiming to have this upper hand and compassion toward those seeking a better life, they've never actually been to Central America. And they've never actually witnessed what really helps the kids there. I'll tell you what the best option is. Not to lure them on a dangerous journey north with their families or alone, but to give them and their families assistance on the ground and support organizations, many of them faith-based, embedded among the people, that provide them with aid, self-sustainability, and real development possibilities. I've seen it firsthand. It's amazing. It's inspiring work, groups like Food for the Poor and others. And it certainly didn't come from the government. I've been with these people in remote villages in Guatemala and elsewhere, and you know what? Most of them want to stay home. And given the opportunity, they would. That said, Congress needs to change our laws so that immigrant families can remain together. Allow the reinstitution of family detention centers so genuine asylum seekers can await trial without separation from their children. And at the same time, border agents should be allowed to turn back family units from all countries. We simply do not have the manpower or the money or the resources to stay in the international foster care business, investigating the relations of every child that enters the U.S. illegally and housing them throughout that entire lengthy process. In the meantime, the president is in kind of an impossible situation. He has a moral obligation to protect the American people and these children now in our care, even as the current law puts those obligations sometimes in conflict. It's time for members of both parties to stop playing politics with the border and the helicopters. Stop playing politics with the border and these immigrants and act. If you really care, do the right thing. And that's the angle.